So, anyways, all that being said, welcome to the Burn the Ladders podcast, brought to you, of course, by OVR. We are recording right now a week after Thanksgiving. So if you still want to try and, get some OVR stuff, you better hurry because apparently the world wants OVR sprints and OVR jumps and velocities and broad jump mats. And goodness, we can barely keep up with the demand. So go to OVRperformance.com, and while you're there, check out the OVR score. It's a completely free utility. It's a fun thing that we developed that I've been using for years with my athletes. It's a sort of full athlete assessment tool that is, pretty simple to test. It's like a mini combine that gamifies everything. And really, as one college strength coach said to me, this is in essence a report. And I said, yeah, that's kind of the idea. It's a report, but unlike a lot of the force plate reports and things like that are, so data heavy and have numbers and abbreviations that no one can understand without a sports science or kinesiology degree. The OVR score gives you a very simple, totally gamified, almost a video game-like presentation that kids, athletes, parents, coaches alike can all readily understand. We try to put it in a language that makes sense to everybody. So go check that out. Go play around with that. And with all of that, all the intros and sponsorship out of the way, today I have my friend Stephen Thompson on the podcast. So finally, we have a professional here, someone to show me how to do things the right way. If you haven't, and if you're listening to my podcast, I doubt you haven't, but if you haven't, Stephen has one of the best, if not the best, podcast in the space, the Voodoo Power Podcast, which he calls plates and pancakes at the top of every episode. And one of the few questions that I have sort of lined up in my mind, we will ask him about that. But principally, why I'm interested in having Stephen on here today is because while he is always talking to the people that you and I are interested to hear from, he's too courteous a host and he's too smart a coach. So I want to dive into what Stephen does with his training, with his athletes, because he also, every time I look up on the internet, he is posting real results, and not just results in the gym. He's got kids who are competing at states. He's got kids who are winning medals. He's pumping out a lot of success from. I know you're near Kansas City, but I don't believe you're in sort of the thick of it, right? You're kind of out in the sticks a little bit.
Yeah, we're about an hour south in a town of, I would say, 1,600 on the last census. It's somewhere right around there. It might be 1,700, but yeah, it's pretty small.
There you go. So, again, in my days with Louis, he often talked about how a good coach is when they pump out consistent results from sort of a genetic pool that shouldn't exist. When you've got sort of one in 100 or 1 in 1,000 type performances consistently coming out of a town of 1,000, that is evidence of a system at play. So, with all of that, first thing I'm going to ask you, Stephen, I'm just going to cut straight to the point on a lot of things. What, and I've heard you talk a little bit about some of the perspectives and kind of lenses that you kind of come into training through. I'm very out there and open about, like, I come at everything from this like West Side conjugate vantage point. Like that's how training was shaped to me. What you're so interested in what everyone does, and you sort of can talk about so many different systems. What is that like native tongue for you?
I think when you boil it all down, it is a basis of West Side. And that was, I think everybody kind of hits that deal. Like the first book you read is what builds your kind of core. And if it's working, you don't vary too much. So while it's got an essence of 5-3-1, at the heart of it all, the way we rotate the 5-3-1 keeps it very West Side. So we have a max effort day, and then we have a dynamic day. And for a long time, I'll be honest, I don't think that I saw the benefits of the dynamic day in athletes. I think we were going too light. I think, it was just a day, and the consistency was helping, don't get me wrong. But once we got, without plugging you too much, but once we got the OVR, once we got the OVR, I could see, some of the kids started saying, hey, I think we're going too light on this. And I'm like, I can't disagree with that. So I had listened to guys talk about velocity-based training, and we'd always use percentages. And I'm like, well, there's got to be something to it. But a lot of the guys I saw using velocity-based training were going so fast that I was like, well, our percentages kind of all work out. I don't know that I see a need for it. But then you come out with your box, so I'm like, I'm going to do it. Then we started tinkering with speeds. Then we got to a speed that really moved the needle for us. We started hanging out at that 0.6 on our squats. And all of a sudden, like, we had good athletes, don't get me wrong. But once we dialed that in, these guys' squats went through the roof. Like, squat day turned into something that was actually scary. Our max effort day, because our dynamic day was driving it so hard. The kids were squatting 405, things like that. That's not ultimately scary. If you're a coach and you've got spotters and things like that, that's not a huge deal. Well, now all of a sudden you're getting up into the 600s, and you got kids and seniors or just out of high school that are loading the bar up to 600. Now you have to start thinking about what you're doing. You're like, okay, this isn't the kids of the past. We've got to figure out how to make sure that we can accommodate these weights. That's when I saw the change, which is still a West Side idea.
Yeah.
We just transformed it a little bit where we were using velocities. And the one thing I think that helped us really move the needle a little bit more was taking this West Side idea of the dynamic day, and we blended it with Bondarchuk. So once we figure out what your weight is, we'll just take the squat, for example, but all lifts work the same way. Once we figure out what your speed is at 0.6 or what your weight is at 0.6, we will stay there at that weight until you move the needle up to 0.7, 0.75, and then we're going to throw chains on it, and then we're going to slow you back down. I didn't think much about it, and I watched a kid, let's say, on his speed day. I'm trying to remember the numbers so I don't lie to somebody, but I want to say we started out, his speed day was 225, and he was a strong kid at 0.6. Well, he shot up to 0.75. Well, we put 100 pounds of chain on, and then we had to put 50 pounds of weight on to get him to drop back down to where he was moving at 0.6. I've never seen those kind of results. Like, that's insane. And then now his safety squat bar is 600, and he's moving 345 at 0.6. Like, and he can't keep the bar on his back. Like, we have to put bands on the bar around him to keep the bar from flying off his back. It's like, when you find a system like that, you sure don't want to give it up. And that's it. All come from West Side, and then just slowly finding the pieces that worked for high school athletic development, I guess that was probably a really long answer for a very short question.
No, that's fine. And my frame of reference of long and short is, you've talked to me. Like, I don't understand what short really is. Short for me is you still can kind of remember where you are. Like, that's how a lot of my podcasts end, is I kind of talk until literally, like, I realize, like, I'm not getting enough oxygen because I'm just burning it. But I've had similar experiences, when I first started using VBT years ago before creating OVR. Well, we were working on a jump device at the time, but and VBT was like on the list, but we hadn't quite gotten there, hadn't partnered with Adam yet. But I was using VBT with a kid, and I've always sort of progressed it as, like, how much weight you can hit over the speed. So, we don't just like find a number and then like that's always I've heard people kind of discuss that approach, and it makes sense to me. Like, you're trying to teach. I just had a conversation yesterday with someone, like you're trying to teach something with every exercise, with every rep. You're trying to teach something, whether it's like a physical adaptation or sort of a conceptual idea that you're trying to transfer to the athlete to acquire some sort of skill. But I just had a conversation yesterday about like all the ways that you can take this sort of similar paradigm, where, simply try and see, can you move 5 pounds more at 0.6? Can you move 5 pounds more at 0.6? And to me, it's making those tiny jumps so that almost set to set, it feels like the same weight. And you purposefully like micro load so that it just always feels like the same weight. And so the kid's kind of like chasing this repetition of the speed, just like, can I do essentially the same weight, but over the course of, a full workout, that essentially the same might have shifted 40 pounds. So you've taught them to like coordinate and sequence everything that much faster. But then the other idea of it, sort of like as you say there, where, okay, now instead of trying to move more weight at the same speed, try to move the same weight at greater speed. Which like in my setting, in a school setting with like so many kids, is hard to implement. But in sort of smaller groups in a private setting, like that's to me, a really intriguing way. Cause I know that like, that's the kind of thing where the same kid who didn't respond to like my way of doing it, that might click so much better in their head. So that's, and I've done a similar thing in terms of like, having a kid where even just trying to hit that same 0.6, a kid who started at like 150 and then a few weeks later was doing 300. So I threw bands on, slowed him back down to 150. And then after a month or two, he's back up in the 300s at the same speed. And we go, okay, so we'll double the bands. And we did this, and eventually sort of a similar thing of, this big tight end went from a 2-something squat to, 385 plus 300 plus pounds of band on a safety squat bar for reps at 0.67. Only, within a year, basically. And this sort of thing of like, he never knew what was on the bar. And we were doing like 12 sets of 2 because that was separate from the team training. It was just like in my garage, so I could do wild things with him. But that same thing of like, it'd be set 7 or 8, and he's grinding out to hit whatever that kind of marker is. And we'd have to go back and like tally it up kind of at the end of the workout to go like, okay, well, you advanced 35 pounds this week, and very quickly it was like, all right, well, you did your old max for, triples at 0.6. But yeah, to sort of contextualize a little more your circumstance, where I somewhat know this, but where do you train? What's the environment that you train in? What's the setup?
So when we first started this, we started it during COVID, and the gym's all shut down. I had to dig through all of my stuff to find an old bench and an old set of weights. And a few kids hit me up, and they're like, "Hey, we're tired of sitting around the house. We want to come lift." Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. So we set it up where I was riding colts. So we set it up in the barn with a sand floor. Every night we had to pick it up, because I was going to ride colts that evening. So every night we had to pick all the weight up.
Had you trained people before COVID?
No. I'd studied, and I was trying to get myself right. That's actually what started it all. Was my kids were grown, and I was sitting around not doing anything. And that epiphany of life hits you like, is this it? Is this how I'm going to go out sitting on the couch at 3:00 once I got home from work? And so that started this evolution. Well, then I started reading and studying. And I'm like, well, this stuff isn't that hard. Why in the world are we not seeing the results that I think we should see? Because when I read this book, it makes it pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try it. So I tried it on myself, and I saw results, and I was enjoying the process. Well, then COVID hit, and my nephew and his friends, since we had known since they were little kids, wanted to go fishing. So we go fishing, and he's like, "What are you doing? How did you accomplish this? Because last time I saw you, you weren't this big, you weren't this strong." And I'm like, "Hey, let's go at it. Let's try it." So he started coming out, and my nephew started coming out. The one last year was the Division II national champion at 174. The other got a scholarship to pitch at Ottawa here in Kansas. So we saw those kids were already good athletes. You know what I mean? I don't know how much my system helped. They were already freaks, but we saw benefit really quickly. So they come out here, they lift it in the barn. I mean, country as country can be. We picked it up every night. Well, then I knew that wasn't going to work forever because we were tired of picking stuff up. So in the alleyway of the barn, we built a little platform. And it was during COVID, so everybody tried new stuff with COVID. So my kids had bought a bunch of chickens, but we didn't have a chicken house, so they were roosting in the barn. So every night we had to put trash bags over the equipment so that the chickens didn't roost on them and then crap all over it. So it was just crazy process. So finally we sat down and we're like, okay, it's going to get cold here. We've got to do something. So on the side of the barn, we added a lean. I enclosed it all in. I worked a bunch of overtime to pay for it. And right around Thanksgiving, it was starting to get pretty cold. We finally got the heat on and everybody lifted in there. So from there, it started out as a 20 by 20 room. And I'll tell you, it would get crowded. Knocked down a wall here a few years ago, moved it out a little bit more. So we got a little bit more space. We're even talking about having to go bigger now. But yeah, we added on to the barn. We built its own little area. And that's kind of what we do now.
All right. So what was, and if you've never listened to Steven and you haven't picked it up so far, Steven is a cowboy. What was your, so I guess that did you start training your kids, or it was just born out of your own training? And how long had you been training? Like, what was your athletic background before, or was it just from riding?
I had played high school sports, and then we had played a lot of recreational sports up through, but we just went and played. We didn't train to do those things. I mean, in high school, we had somewhat of a weight program, but you were just expected to go work. So you were strong from picking up hay all summer and the other things you did. The weight room really didn't move the needle for us. Now, if we would have had a different program like I see now, it probably really would have. There would probably be a lot more state championships on our banner, but that's just not how we did things. So my training knowledge was fairly limited. I had a passion for horses. That's what I chased. And then we had kids that were pretty active in sports, and we were probably like every other competitive sport parent. We spent all of our time at practice and all of our time on specialty ideas, hitting, pitching. They weren't super interested in the weight room. They were good at what they did. It didn't seem like it was a needle mover. And then as my daughter got older, she had some injuries happen that I look back now and say, man, if I would have known the things I know now, I could have helped her through that, and she could have been more successful through her collegiate career. But, hindsight's 20/20. But as they got older, that's when it started dawning on me that we were lacking a component. And then so I started trying to help them with that. But by then they're, 16, 17. They've got success. They don't want to spend time in the weight room. So that moved to me. I decided I was going to kind of get my stuff in order and feel better. And then I decided, okay, I'll try powerlifting, which I'm not a good power lifter at all. Don't get me wrong. But I needed a reason to make sure I stayed in the gym. I needed some sort of accountability. So if you know you're going to lift at a meet, well, you better be in the gym 4 days a week, whatever it is you lift. That's what drove. So then I started looking at the gains I was making. And then it's a close-knit community, so everybody in my daughter's classes. So those boys started talking to me about stuff, and I'm like, well, I think I can help you. let's try. So I don't know, 2019, I had some kids ask me, and I was going to help them in public gyms. Well, nobody wanted, and I understand this, but nobody wanted to give those kids a break financially. They wanted to charge them. We'll try, a kid's just not going to do that. So COVID actually was a blessing because we decided to do this thing for free. And that's what started. So to answer your question, my training background was not incredibly deep. I had to research a lot. That's actually what started the podcast, because I needed to start asking coaches questions about things I was seeing so that I could make the adjustments to help my kids. And it just grew from there. And I really think all the time I spent with horses, while it may not take care of the squats and the bench and whatever, I was really good at seeing movement. I was really good at seeing what was straight. I was really good at seeing what was forward, what didn't look like crookedness. I feel like in an athlete, I'll have athletes send me pictures now and I'll be like, your hips are out. Or I can watch them on Prepcast and I can watch them walk to the huddle and be like, okay, something happened. He's not right. He's going to cramp up if they're not careful. And I think that comes from watching horses move. I really do. But you put that together with the weights and all of a sudden we got something.
Yeah. That's an interesting observation, because I've told you this before. I'm very impressed consistently when we talk, sort of at how you like tie concepts together very quickly. There's a lot of people that you not only tie them together, but you seem to be comfortable like acting on them very quickly. Like there's this bridging of being curious to understanding to applying that I'm not real sure of how capable or incapable most people are sort of in traversing that, but definitely you have like an easy sort of confidence in getting from step 1 to 2 to 3. And I recognize that because like the next time we talk about something, when you ask a question, a lot of people ask like a good sort of first round of questions. And then the next time you talk to them, you can tell they haven't put anything into play, so they can't ask like a good second round. I can't remember what it was, but it was like the second time we talked, you asked me something in response to something we talked about the first time. And immediately I was like, oh, he tried that. And then not only did you have that second round of questions, but it was clear from whatever it was that you had understood what I said the first time. Like you had sort of the proper follow-up of picking up exactly what I meant and right sort of where I left off. And a lot of times it takes almost like rounds of, talking to someone before they're like willing to venture into anything new. A lot of people, there's this analysis by paralysis that sort of goes on, and they don't quite get that, like, you can't really make the breakthrough until you just try stuff. Like you don't know what that next round of good questions are until you have the context of sort of the failures in the wake of the first round. But so with all that, to hear you say, like that your timeline there is relatively short, but it's to me like it's not unfathomable or really that surprising. But when you say like you're good at looking at movement, my question immediately was going to be, where do you think that comes from? And then you go right into, I think it comes from horses. And immediately in my mind, I'm going, well, of course, because a horse can't talk to you and tell you what it's feeling. All you have are these sort of soft visual cues of like what that animal is feeling or is potentially going to do to you. So you have to, I come from sort of a country enough background of, I know what I've spent a little bit of time around horses. I've spent a lot of time around dogs. I've spent a little bit of time in the wild, in the water with gators. Like you do develop, I think, this like sort of keen sense of like how an animal is like gearing up to move. I never connected that until just now, live. A lot of this is me just narrating my thoughts in real time, but I never connected that as like a means of skill acquisition for sort of that trait. That's very interesting. So I did want to say, what do you think helped to sort of ease or allow your like rate of adaptation as a coach, to kind of pick things up relatively as quickly as you have and as you do? Are you, I think for me, like a lot comes from personally, strangely being like unburdened by the sort of traditional route that people get into the field, like having it just the context and perspective of so many other things, like how I relate to training is often not just direct through training. What do you think allows you to see, aside from the horses, what allows you to see that movement or to sort of make sense of these things? Because what was your educational background before any of this?
Pretty blue collar. I mean, I went to high school, and then there I went straight to an electrical apprenticeship, and then at the same time I was riding horses, which, I put us behind the 8 ball when we were young, because I would gladly call into work to ride horses all day. You know what I mean? And so that's just, but there again, without getting too far down that rabbit hole, I was just a blue collar construction guy. I spent a lot of time working around guys, so you pick up a lot of different ideas on how to figure things out. And lucky, when I was young, I got around some people that really taught me the benefit of studying, the benefit of practicing, the benefit of going to clinics, the benefit of allowing time to get better and not just winging everything you did. Now once you've put a little study behind you, you can go see how that translates. But maybe that's what gave me the confidence, is knowing that I have studied, I've talked to, I've watched, I've done all these things. Let's go try it. The other thing was, I think I had the benefit of having some dudes that had high body awareness, that were chasing. Well, let's just take the one wrestler. He had gotten third 3 times at state. He was done getting third. So when he showed up, school had shut down, April of that year, April 2020. So they were out of school. And so he's like, look, this is what's going to happen. I've tried every other way. What way can we try? Well, I've got how many months to get him ready? I'm all for the slow cooker and everything, but this kid's standing here telling you, like, we got to go. I've got to win if I want to achieve my dreams. So I'm like, okay. All I had was a Dave Tate kind of conjugate style program that he puts on Elite FTS. And so we would go to the barn and we would start working on it. I'm like, what do you feel? And me and him had all these conversations, and he started telling me what he felt when he'd go wrestle, because he'd go wrestle twice a week up North Kansas City. They have a bunch of really high level wrestlers come in. They have a lot of Division I wrestlers come back. So he was wrestling all summer, and we worked this through, and he's like, okay, I noticed that when I throw a guy, I feel like this. So I believe that this exercise is working. And then we started mixing that in with jumps. And then all of a sudden he got more explosive. And then that year of COVID, they moved the Rocky Mountain National Invitational from Wyoming to Independence. A team asked him to go wrestle. They go and they win a national title. And he said, I'm beating kids I'm not supposed to be beating. So we started, and we kept log books, and we would go back and look at what his training cycle was and what was working. We'd watch his jumps. And because the way I feel like I see movement, I could watch his jumps and be like, okay, your week there. We need to adapt the exercises we're doing to get you stronger so that when you jump, your knee don't cave, or when you broad jump, your foot don't tail out. All of a sudden, all that stuff started making sense to me. Like, okay, we can build this, we can fix this, we can get you going. And he was a high level kid that it worked really quickly. I think where if you'd have some lower level athletic kids in there, it would take longer to see that. But you've dealt with some really high level athletes. So as soon as you put something in the program, you're seeing immediate feedback. So you know it's working. So then that gives you more trust. That gives you more trust when you go work with an athlete that maybe isn't showing the results as fast, and then you can pacify them through the process of like, hey, it's going to work. It's just give it a little more time. So the benefit of athletes, I think, was a real driving factor, and somebody that could communicate back with you like, yes, they have the body awareness to say, yes, this is working.
Yeah. Well, I hear, like, even in an answer that's, seemingly as like simple as that. Number one, as to, like I said, your education background, working I've talked to people about this too. Like, when I was in college, I built decks. I built decks, and I was a valet, and I was a valet who couldn't drive stick, which meant I had to get pretty creative. I Fred Flintstoned a lot of cars. When that stick would show up, you're old, like, just I might leave a beater in front of the club just because I couldn't move it. I don't know how I was. Well, I do know how I was employed there. It just says a lot about my employer, not so much about me. But I've always been into things, whether it's fishing, whether it's I do like cooking a little bit. I'm not very good at it. I grew up like in the weight room, but whether it was when I was young doing like lawn care type jobs, or the building decks thing was crazy because I also had no background. It was literally just like they gave me a nail gun and they told me to show up after the homeowner had left. And then they came and they picked me up before the homeowner came back. So every day, like, the deck got a little bigger, but the guy that the homeowner was paying, he would be working another job and he'd be paying me, like $10 an hour, charging them 50 and just pocketing the other 40. Again, I've probably had some work experiences that say a whole lot about my employers more than my skills. But anyways, when you do something, the weight room and training, it is manual, and it is just all like spatial logistics. And I do think that there's a lot of people who get into the field like fresh out of college, and they've done the book part, but even if you're not training, just simply, like working construction, you're not showing up to the same place every day. You might be on a job for a while. It's sort of like production in that sense of like, you might be here for, a few months, but then one day you're not here anymore. Now you're over there and you're doing something similar, but everything over there is different. Like, you have to solve similar problems, but they're not ever the same problem. Which starts to sound a lot like conjugate. It starts to sound a lot like just training in general. Like, and when you have sort of this connection of like, of building something and of doing similar tasks with constant variation, and just where, like, if you're on a job site, like, you have to be cognizant of like, if you're moving something that's large and potentially dangerous, that you don't hit things. Like, you have to develop this very baseline spatial awareness of your own body and an awareness of what's going on around you. You're just doing simple problem solving all the time. That again, it's like these, as I'm trying to discover things about you by like just listening to you, like those are things that I've equated that in terms of like my background in production, even though I was training before production, and I would tell people on sets and stuff, and while doing projects, that like the way that I approached production was like training. But now the way that I look at, you know, like I bring all of that with me when I look at something. So I likewise, I don't have the traditional certifications and degrees, and, you know, like my educational background has nothing to do with what I do. Um, but it's that same like very broad sort of connectivity of what you think to what is physically happening. And I do see that especially with young coaches who go the educational route, that they like it's like that route distracts them from the real world, you know, just the component of like getting out and operating in space. And you see that, I think, in a lot of jobs where like on paper someone's got, you know, a very impressive resume, but you have to like almost look deeper for like when was a point in time where they just like operated in space, like when, you know, when did the math become spatial and fluid and real out in the world? um but yeah, so now that I've distracted myself with that, um you know, the and those are things that like you saw even with, you know, like that's very Louis-esque, you know, like the background just in construction, you know, instead of horses he had race cars. um but it it does lead, you know, and you look at like half the guys at Westside work, you know, more than half the guys worked manual jobs, whether it was painting houses or working on construction crews, or, you know, even like Hoff does commercial or commercial landscaping. um Drove like, you know, the salt truck in the winters type thing. um Things that, yeah, people like downplay is like, well, it's just blue collar, it's like it's this simple task, but the reality is it's constant variation. And when you're used to dealing with that constant variation, and like um again, like cooking would be the same way, where like you're in the same physical space every day, but like your ingredients are different, you know, like what's in season is different. So you're in a familiar place, so you make it simple in your mind, but you're actually making this constant turnover of decisions. um I think that in a nutshell, like that's just incredibly valuable regardless of what field you end up in, because uh, it makes all of those, it gives you like a mental and cognitive elasticity that so many people, especially now, like inside kids, kind of don't have. um so through your, you know, so you get into training, and again, like so many people, it's that COVID suddenly becomes this jumping off point of their training, whether it's, you know, a ton for a lot of people, it's like, you know, a lot of bad jobs opened up, a lot, you know, a lot of and people just out of desperation were forced to kind of look to places that they wouldn't have otherwise looked. And a lot of that's a very common trope of like a lot of people who start training just kids or family in their vicinity out of lack of resource, like just suddenly traveling across town is a treacherous, you know, concept, or just isn't available. Which again becomes very sort of like reminiscent of old school West Side, of just like Louis was, you know, that weird guy in his garage, and, you know, as the kids rode their bikes by, that eventually some of them would stop and ask, you know, well, can I come? Um, So in a weird way, that was very COVID kind of reduced everyone back to this sort of like 90s aesthetic with their options. That's also right around like when I transitioned from, you know, training a small group of people in my garage or my dad's garage while working on other production stuff to going full bore into coaching. So really reminiscent paths there. So you start from that West Side lens, you start training, you enclose like the lean-to, and you start training people there. How did sort of like how did your how long, I guess, did you until you started to like sort of develop like a style or system that starts to become your own?
That's a pretty good question, because I don't know. While we have a base, I do think the style is evolutionary, and it's going to be modified. But I would say, so we had really good success right out of the gate. I want to say every kid that was out here got what they wanted, whether it was an offer to play collegiately, whether it was to win state, whatever that was. Well, in the driving of improving that, which I don't know how you improve that, but that's that's the naive mind saying, let's make it better. We changed some things, and we took out the dynamic day, and we made deadlift and squat its own individual day. A new group of athletes come in. Kids got strong, but when I go watch them compete, they were slower. And then I also watched the attitude in the gym. You got two heavy, grueling nights. You have a deadlift and a squat night. Well, the attitude of people walking into the gym had changed. So we evaluated this, and it was like,
how many kids did you have by then? Like how had sort of the gym grown by then?
We had went from 3 to 4 to probably at this time we were 12 to 15, I would say. So it was in the first few years, so it was still in its infancy. So I had a bigger pool to look at, and then I also had some really young kids. I had some kids that weren't super athletic, and then I had some freaks on the other end. So I had a wide group that I was watching. And we incorporated really chasing rep maxes, and then we incorporated those two heavy days. And as I watched, I'm like, this isn't what I had before. Something's wrong. So let's get rid of that, and let's go back to what we were doing. And then when we went back, I immediately saw the results I wanted to see. So that would have been the ingraining of the system. Like, okay, we are not deviating from this model as far as the days are laid out anymore. Now we can change how we can change how that microcycle goes in the day, and we can adjust the exercises. But we went too hard. We went too heavy. The mobility wasn't there. The speed wasn't there, and they were just fatigued. So I would say within 2 years, I was pretty set on what I wanted. I wanted a dynamic day, and I wanted a max effort day. And we weren't going to deviate from that. Now, inside of there, we've moved to speeds, away from percentages. We've moved to speeds, and then we run like a reverse 5-3-1. So you're always hitting a max effort lift. You're hitting your squat and your rotate, or your squat and your deadlift rotate weekly, and then you have an incline press, and you have a bench press that rotates. So of the 3-week cycle, you're hitting a max effort lift almost every time, and then if you don't, you're hitting heavy threes. So we did adjust that a little bit, and I really like how that's worked out. That got a 5-3-1 model closer to a West Side model for us. And then we knew we didn't want to move away from the dynamic, because the kids needed that. They needed that speed in there, but they also needed that break. You can only deadlift them heavy and squat them heavy so much, and it starts showing up on the field. So there again, I'm answering these questions way too long, but
no, that's fine.
It was within a couple years that I knew what I wanted to do, And because the results on the mat, the results on the court, the results on the field didn't get better, they actually got worse. So then we're like, okay, we're not doing that anymore.
And so the sort of tell that was informing you was that the kids, was it more so that they were getting slow from the training, or that you were just seeing them be like crushed by fatigue, or was it more sort of almost like the psychological fatigue? Which was it? All three of those were what perked you, or was it particularly like, one or two of those? Kind of what were those tells to you?
I think the mental fatigue come first. And usually we wouldn't see it on squat day. Usually we would see it on deadlift day, and everybody would come in and the room would just be shot, and they'd be like, oh crap, we got to pull. And at that time, like I said, we were pulling rep maxes. And if you want to defeat somebody, just do deadlift rep maxes week after week after week. It gets to where it takes a special person that wants to endure that kind of physical punishment. That's what I saw first. And then I saw probably overall fatigue second. And then I think the overall fatigue was carrying over to the court. And all three of those were hitting about the same time. And I'm like, okay, this isn't working for what we want. They're, when they come in, I want to see them be excited. And I would rather chase a triple or a single than I would at 8 or a 10, because your number just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And once we changed that, the whole mood changed. So I think a combination of everything, and being aware of your kids and being aware of, if I don't do something, these kids are just going to quit coming in. Yeah. So even if it would have worked, if the kids don't come in, who cares?
Right.
You didn't win. So changing back, the attitude immediately switched. I saw more benefit on the field. They started hitting them higher numbers again. Everything just kind of went back to a more steady state of what I wanted for the athletes that were showing up here.
So how were you gauging fatigue at the time? Was it just if they were hitting was it just the weight on the bar, or were you doing plyos or sprints? Did you have anything sort of measurable, or it was just sort of their verbal feedback and weight on the bar?
At that time, we had very little technology. I had a homemade Vertec that we were using, and we were doing mostly box jumps. I don't know that I saw a huge decrease, but when you're box jumping, like when you set the OVR jumps up, you can see everything right there. A box jump is going to lie to you a little bit on what fatigue actually is. Are they hitting you're not going up in 1 inch increments. So if they're hitting a 30-inch box jump, let's say they were actually probably, a 38. Well, if you're not measuring that so precisely, you really don't know. So that wasn't helping. We hadn't got as far down the sprint rabbit hole at that time as we are kind of now. So I was just working off of how fast the bar was moving, how their form looked, how their attitude was when they had to do it, and what was going on between sets. When they pull and they go and they just throw themselves in a slump on a bench or a chair, and you got to coax them into doing their next set, that's how I gauge the fatigue.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, again, in talking to like younger coaches, often they, certainly with technology, like you can kind of see things, you can quantify things a lot easier, and you can catch things kind of faster. So the number, especially if you have large groups like I do, the numbers will jump out at you before the kids are saying anything to you. But there's still so much that you can glean from those simple things of like, just how are the kids talking, their body language, their posture, like they might still be like gutting things out for you because they want to even if it's a private setting, they want to please you as the coach, as sort of like the adult in the position of authority in the room. They want to try and get an attaboy or something. But you can still, like, for me, some of the things that I look for are like literally their body weight and their height. We measure both body weight and height multiple times per week. And I can see little things like, you're 0.3 inches shorter this week or today than you were a couple days ago. Like, so you're dehydrated, you didn't sleep enough, like you're stressed out, you're down 2 or 3 pounds. And then also looking at just the clock on the wall of, how quickly do they get through their workout and actually finish it or actually get to sort of the common point that they'll get to. Are they, it's been an hour. Are they still like on their first or second exercise, like, and just slumped over on a bench, a 5-minute or 6-minute rest has become 12 minutes and they're still not hitting their weight.
And I would say in there, we didn't see an increase in maxes doing that. Like, it didn't help. All I did was beat a bunch of kids down and their numbers didn't go up. So then you have a bunch of kids sitting there saying, well, when we started this whole thing, my deadlift was 385. My deadlift's still 385. I can pull this for 10, but who really cares? I want my main number to go up. And when you start looking at, everybody keeps their books, and when you start talking about those things, it becomes obvious that if we're not driving our overall strength up and we're just driving conditioning, well, they'll get conditioning at practice. I need to get their overall strength up. That was a big indicator that something had to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of, and you see this like in sports as well, like in sport coaching, if all you look at is like your win-loss record, which that might be the ultimate goal, but like if all you're looking at is your win-loss record, you know what you did, you don't know how you did, if that makes sense. Like, if you, as you start to break things down further, you start to look at okay, we won this game. Yeah, but as we go into, our efficiency numbers on a play to play on a play to play scale, you might see that like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have really won that. Like, that's not a process worth repeating, or, look at how well we won this, or look at how we should have won this. Like the plan was working. That was just a bad day. That was just, a bad break. To apply that same, a lot of people just don't have the sense, the sort of like idea or inclination to, they're not aware to apply or how many different ways, how many different decisions there are, and like tells that there are within the workout or within a plan. That's why I like having something every day that can be a marker of fatigue or of a maximum output, whether that's, like yesterday where we were hitting exit velos off the tee, which we did after vibration plates. So I'm running that experiment now. We've got an electrical hookup in the dugout. So after one day, the results appear to be pretty good, and the kids seem to bought into it. But if that holds, might have some vibration plates in the dugout this year. But having just something that can like tell you something back, because there's nothing worse than like you followed an 8-week plan only to find out in 8 weeks it didn't take you anywhere, and meanwhile you felt, like you felt where things were going the whole time. But people get caught up in sort of checking the box of going down the road with the plan, and they're not actually looking at like what shape are we in as we go down. That disconnect from like work in a vacuum is not valuable. Like, you can be busy all day, you know, cooking fries, but you'd rather be the McDonald's CEO, you know, out on the golf course every afternoon and, you know, coming in by helicopter at 10:30. Yeah. So when did you start to incorporate, uh, sprinting and jumping and sort of what were the big epiphanies as you started to integrate that? Because I've also uh I've seen you post some things. I believe you post like you time bounds, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how again that sort of curiosity and fearlessness to on this rather short journey that, you know, how do you get from not really having any tech, you've got box jumps and you've got a Vertec, which to anyone who uses either of those, you understand pretty quickly are like relatively self-limiting from a logistics standpoint. Like no matter how much you love them, you're going to be, you know, pretty constrained in terms of how much feedback you can readily get from them. Um, what inspired you to kind of make that jump into getting more tech and experimenting with jumping, with sprinting, and then what are like the variations that you like using?
I think the podcast helped push that. I was talking to so many people and they were really pushing the sprinting and the jumping. And I knew at the beginning, I knew I had to be better at it before I got too far down this rabbit hole. So I really got deep into studying sprinting. Well, then I started looking at it. I really feel like I look at it.
What was the lens that you got into sprinting from?
Performance. Just to get the kids to the next level, just to help.
I'm saying like who or what systems or.
Oh, what system? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with you now.
Yeah. The same way that West Side kind of, you know, like that shaped your model. Cause that's also a thing of, you know, like say for me, a lot of my jumping came from Jared and Bird.
Okay.
Simply like I had no real education or no exposure to I had like Louis box jump stuff. And then watching Bird do flies. Like that's kind of how everything, and then I ended up finding out later like about Feed the Cats, for example, but by then like it was like, oh, yeah, that's like what I do. It wasn't informed by that. Like I'd picked up those pieces mostly again through Bird. That was like my sort of the journey. But
okay,
yeah, what got you? What was the light bulb or who was that sort of initial push to start sprinting? What made you go like, this is what I got to do?
That it's weird. Tony Holler gave me a chance on the podcast when nobody else even knew who I was, and I had reached out and emailed him, and he said yes. So that was my first little bit of indoctrination into a Feed the Cats Fly 10 system. I'm not going to say that I totally went down that rabbit hole yet, but that was the start. And then from there, lo and behold, Louis got sprinting books. Louis got sprinting videos. And Westside, I had found a sale, and they were given, I think, all of their electronic downloads for like $5. They do it all the time. And I bought the football one, and then he started talking about dropping 40 times, and I'm like, okay, this means something. I need to get further into this. If Louis talking about dropping 40 times, this is important. Then he had a sprinting video, which is still one of the best sprinting videos I've watched. I mean, he breaks it all down. I think he has an Ohio State female sprinter that comes in and they work through a whole workout, and the way he starts explaining. And then he has a spot in the beginning where it's just him on camera explaining the sprint and explaining what needs to happen and explaining how to practice. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me. He's talking about if 65% of the race is acceleration, that's where 65% of your time needs to be. And that has stuck with me because I still feel I'm the opposite as most coaches. I could care less. I shouldn't say I could care less, but top speed doesn't drive me as much as acceleration drives me because I think acceleration is the only way to prove your top speed. I don't think we're out here by getting kids faster. I think we're improving their acceleration, but we don't really understand that we're improving their acceleration. So I'll just take that step out and let's just improve your acceleration.
You don't push your kids out of a moving van and just have them hit the ground going. You make them earn their top speed.
Yes, I do. We tried the van, but after you hurt a couple kids, they just quit jumping out. But it takes a special kid to jump out of a moving truck. But for whatever reason, when Louis said that, it made total sense to me. And then he pointed me down a Barry Ross. He talks about Barry Ross quite a bit. But through it all, I ended up into Charlie Francis stuff. And Charlie starts talking about when Ben Johnson figured out the race, and when he got so fast, it was because he became more patient and his acceleration was so good. And then the middle part of his race got better. And then he was able to express his top speed better. And I'm like, okay, that makes the most amount of sense to me. So how do we improve acceleration? And that's where the chains come in. And I know they've been done before. We wasn't doing something revolutionary. I totally get that. But I related it back to when you learn a skill, and I'll use welding, for example. I spent the last half of my career welding. When you first learn to weld, it is happening so dang fast that you can't process it in your brain. You're just trying to keep up with what all these images your mind's seeing. You need it to slow down. And more times than not, in welding, if you try to slow it down, well, then it looks like crap because you're piling up on one side or you're burning through your material. So it takes time for it to slow down in your head. Roping's another way. When I was learning to rope, it all just happens so fast that it just takes this time. Well, how do I slow it down for an athlete where they can learn it faster? And that's where I got into chains. I can slow it down so their mind can keep up with what their feet are doing. And that made sense to me. And then I could spend more time on the acceleration. Well, then that jumped into incorporating these bounds and trying to get that first step better. So I came into, and now I see it in books all the time. So I know I wasn't the one that invented it. I just know that I happen to stumble across it too. But they call it, I do like a lot of lateral bounds and push hard in the beginning, shorten it up. And then I want you to take that into a sprint. But when you take that into a sprint, I want you to feel that first step. What does that first step feel like? And when that clicks in their head, and then you can start putting chains on them, and then they can put all that together, well, you're going to start dropping times like crazy. And that is how the model came to be. And I've leaned heavy on what Louis wrote. I know people just think he trained powerlifters, but my goodness, if there was something out there under the sun that he could improve athletic performance, he understood it and knew it. And his sprinting book, is still one of the best sprinting books I have. I mean, he just makes it make sense. And that's the model. So we went to Florida on vacation. I had just gotten that book in the mail. So every morning I would wake up before everybody else and I would get that book out. I'd sit out watch the ocean come in, sit out on the deck and read that book, highlight it. I have a notebook somewhere where I took all of the notes off of it because I wanted to use that for wrestling. I wanted to take that model and use it for my wrestler, so that we could get him to where he wanted to be. And we just took the ideas from that, put it into wrestling training, and that kid smoked everybody. It's the principles are the same no matter how you look at it. It's all one system. And when that dawned on me, it was like, okay, here we go. So that's where the chains come in. And then I started looking at, if I want to improve acceleration, I want to improve broad jump. Well, how do I improve broad jump? Well, what if I chain them? And then I time them. And then if I see that time go down, I know they should be producing more force, so their acceleration should be better. So now their top speed should be dropping. And we took that even to the next level. We've got a really good javelin thrower, and he come back from Texas A&M, and he showed me a video, and they're going through their crossovers. And I started looking at it, and I'm like, I think we're looking at this wrong, man. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, we're teaching the crossovers is a push down the alley. I said, if you look at this guy, it's a pull. What if we set OVR timers up, we start looking at your ground contact time on your first couple steps and seeing how long you're in the ground and how hard you're pulling. I said, you got to think about pulling, not pushing, pulling. What can we do? And then we're going to hook chains up to you, and then we're going to time you. And he could do 3 crossovers in the gym before he hit the wall to now he can barely do 2 because he's pulling so hard. His ground contact time got so long. And I just looked at it like acceleration theory. If we're going to accelerate down this lane, we've got to get you in the ground longer. We've got to get you pulling harder. And not all of that was my idea, because I listened to you and Adam Vogel talk about setting up a grid. And so I stole that from you. So I want to make sure I give you credit. But once I started looking at that ground contact time of them first couple steps and trying to get them in the ground longer, well, this whole new idea opened up. I was trying to do it with chains, but once I understood I could do it with timers, it got way better.
Yeah.
And then
what kind of times are you pushing them to? What were you seeing, and then what were you trying to adjust them towards?
So his first few steps out of the gate, we'll just take the javelin thrower for example. His first few times, he'd kind of get under 2. He was just pushing really fast, and we were videotaping at the same time. So we'd look, okay, you're let's say he's a 157. And let's look at the video. Okay, well, when you pull, you're not getting clear through full ankle push, or your knee's still bent. You never got your full. So then taking what you and Adam were talking about, well, if you didn't get a full push on your first push, your second push is even going to be less, and your third push is even going to be less. So we have to get you to, what time does it take for you to get a full push, full triple extension, if you will. So then we started looking at, it would be over 2. It would be right around that 2 mark, but we wanted to see him be a little over 2. And then we would compare it to the video. Now, if we can get that faster and he still get triple extension, I'm okay with that. But more times than not, they start focusing on speed and they start shortening that hop. And once that clicked in his mind, I mean, his numbers are through the roof right now, and his hips and the way he's pulling through, that all made sense to him. And we, like I said, he cut 1 full crossover off, just understanding how long he needed to be in the ground. So that made me think that chains held some value, because we were hooking chains to him too while he was doing that, to even slow him down more. And like you said, if it works all the time. It worked in bounds. It worked in sprinting. It works in crossovers. Once I developed what I wanted, and this kid's pulling. I bet he's pulling over 100 pounds of chain. When he's doing that. And then we take them chains off, and I mean, you can't, he's so springy, you can't keep him in the gym, but when it's cold outside, you don't have no choice. So now he has to start, we have to open the gym door, and he has to start outside so that he can get his jumps in when he hits. So all this stuff built to where we are now, but it was not being afraid to try. And what's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody's going to demean me on Instagram. I mean, somebody's going to call it. I don't even know these people. So I'll do it. I'll post it, and then I'll see what happens. And people either like it or they hate it. And if they hate it, well, I mean, they don't necessarily have to follow me. As long as I'm seeing results, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And how much about does that javelin thrower weigh?
Right now, he's about 210.
Okay.
He's probably big for a javelin thrower, really, but that's genetically, he's gifted, and he has a big frame. I think when he gets to school, they may thin him up a little, and that's their business. But right now, it's working for what we're doing, so he's growing. I hate to treat him like a wrestler and say, hey, you're getting too big. If the javelin's going, he went to Nike Nationals. He went to Nike Nationals, and threw a 220. I mean, for a junior in high school, that's getting it out there. So, and then when you come from a big family, like you're around a bunch of football players and stuff, it's hard to keep that weight off of them when that's just genetically how they're built. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's
Yeah.
built like he's built like a freaking Viking. He got blonde hair, and he looks like he's straight from Scandinavian country.
Yeah. I bring up the weight just because I always, anytime talking about ground contact stuff, because that is really something that, again, if you don't have the OVR jump and you're interested in ground contact times, what are you doing? Because it's bar none the best device for that, and pretty much the only one that's going to be portable enough to allow you to set it up on anything like this. But when I do come across people who have gotten into ground contact time stuff and haven't been using devices themselves and sort of gathering their own data, and sort of like working off of their data, rather they try to mimic like what the established literature says. And it's like all of the old, I've got I think is it Ralph Mann, his book on hurdling. I've got across this dungeon of a room that I'm in. But I think that's got a chart in there saying, like your first step should be like 0.17. And it's like, you have to consider that context of, sure, if you're 160 pounds and 5'10" and you're running the 100-meter in, a world-class competition on a Mondo or a Bainon track and you're spiked up. But if you're heavier than that, then you need more time on the ground to establish that necessary mechanical tension. And if the surface is softer or grass or spongier, or your shoe is softer or spongier, if your feet don't have that same level of elasticity, if you're rolling, like side to side across your foot, you might need more time. If you're not coming out of blocks, which means your zero step, that impulse was, that it's like, that's the whole point of the blocks, is it allows you to have a longer impulse because you can get at that lower lean. So even equating ground contact stuff from a 4-point track stance into a 3-point 40 stance, then up into a 2-point stance, it's like your ground contacts are getting longer because you didn't get the same push out of step 0. You have to kind of get, this is what I saw with Villani's guys, like you have to get sort of a window of time. And I want to say it was like 0.55-ish across your first 3 steps. And it was like, if you shortchanged that on step 1, then you made it up. You saw it increase on 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 wouldn't have pushed out as far. So you didn't cover as much ground. But if you could push that time, a bigger chunk of that time into step 1, which also meant that you had to allot more time to the extension on the 0 step, then if you had that extension on 0, then you were further on 1. Then you spent longer time on 1, and you would see this dramatic decline on 2 and 3. But if you shortchanged 1, you'd see a spike up on 2 and a slow taper on 3. And meanwhile, you'd be sometimes, some of these guys were a yard and a half shorter on step 3, because, again, they were impatient on 0 and 1. And then I'd also throw in, when people say, say something like a squat. This is just me taking a dig at people. When people say like a squat only has transfer through like the first step, it's like, that means it has transfer through 2 steps. And those 2 steps are in order: step 0 and step 1, your greatest increase in acceleration, your greatest increase in speed for the entire race. And by volume of time, those are the most impactful 2 steps. So you better squat.
And I agree with that. And even Chris Corfus will tell you the first 3 steps are what wins races. So what makes those first 3 steps better? And I feel like videoing chains and ground contact time. or how I do it. That don't mean it's the only way to do it, but that's how we do it. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, we had a 4x200 team, got second in state last year, and 3 of those guys came out here, and that's how we did it. We did it with a K-box, and we did it with chains, and we just pushed acceleration, got them to be more patient in the race, and they broke the school record 3 times that year.
Yeah.
Long jump was the same way.
So you've said now twice, cameras. So how much do you use like video replay with your kids, and do you do like, how do you integrate that in? Is it after every rep? Do you wait until
No, because otherwise you spend your whole time behind the camera. And a lot of times I lift with them. So when we get to big stuff and we get to stuff that I know is important to them, we'll take the time to set up a camera and watch. Now, if we're sprinting or jumping or bounding, I'm typically not in the mix with that, so I will do a little bit. And a lot of it's out of my own curiosity. So I will do a little bit more. Your really in-tune athletes will come back around and want to see it. The kids that are just out there getting it done, they really don't care. They're going to go get back in line. But when you start talking about your elite athletes, like we're talking about this javelin thrower, he wants to see every rep and he wants to break down every rep. And I'm okay with that because, hey, if this is what's going to make you better and this is what's going to make it click, or if we have another kid in the gym, we'll have them film it and then I'll watch it live and then we'll both look at the film. And then, what does it take? It takes getting across the gym in 3 seconds. Not even that. Yeah. He comes back around. You can go through it slow. 5 seconds. He's got to recoup anyhow for his next rep. So you can look at it and be like, okay, I see you're not. What we started noticing was the first rep would be really good, and then his second step would be trash. He'd start shortchanging it. Okay, well now your first rep's good. Let's get that first rep to mimic the second step, and then he starts putting it all together mentally. And then before too long, you're not even filming anymore because he can feel it. I think it's more important in the beginning than it is, throughout his whole career. But he's like, okay, I shorted that step, or this time is too fast. He knows what he needs now because he's a smart kid and he's a competitor. Then the work you put in on the front end takes care of itself, and you're not doing it as much on the back end, I guess.
What are the common problems you are trying to address in those video sessions?
So one is the push, and then shin angles. Are you up? Are you down? We'll also, like, let's say it's sprinting. We'll go back to sprinting and we're working through accelerations. What are your arms doing? I run into a lot of kids in that acceleration where their arms are almost opposite of what their arms need to be. And I don't know that you always I'm not maybe a good enough coach that I always pick that up in the moment, but when I film it, I'm like, okay, this arm's late, so now you can't drive. That's a pretty easy fix, really. Well, then now all of a sudden their steps get better. Well, then you can start looking at, I don't want to take it too far because I don't want to overwhelm them. So let's look at your first step. What does that look like? How hard are you in the ground? And especially if you're filming bounds into a sprint or falling sprints, then you can start really breaking that down. Look, you are not in the ground near hard enough. Let them do that for a while, and then you start looking at the second step, and then you start looking at the third step, and then by then they have it. But mostly it's little things. It's what your push look like, what your arms look like, and what your body angle look like. And then when we get to top speed, we can start talking about it some too, because their hips always stay back. I don't know what it is. You never learn, unless you have a coach. I don't think kids naturally learn to run with their hips underneath them. So then when we reach that point, we can start talking about that. Especially, I notice this the most with jumpers coming down the runway, long jumpers, triple jumpers. They try to jump and their hips are back. Their hips are never underneath them, so they can't get that springiness they need to really hit that board hard. So then we'll start looking at that. I know I'm kind of all over the map with what we're looking at, but keep it very simple. I look for a hard push. I look for what the arms are doing. I look for the body angle. And then when we move into top speed, I start showing them what their hips are doing.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that answer, because I'm also looking at, or just thinking as I go through this. I had a conversation with a kid last week about his arms, but I realize now, listening to you, like, that's an area that I largely neglect, and probably something where we could easily pick some stuff up. And then thinking about, so say like the lean in sprints. I have a lot of kids who, like, I try to translate to my kids to lean and to project. I want them leaning and projecting out. But I've come to not really like them just leaning forward. Very specifically, I had a kid who was a linebacker who was in the transfer portal, who we got his like 10-yard lead, so it's 10 to 20. That's the big distance that we use the most, just because that's the most convenient thing on the sidewalk outside of our gym. But we got him from like a 118, 119 last spring to over the summer he hit I think like 108.2. So not blazing, but he probably was 215 when he did that. So decent size. Like the combo was, I knew when he like showed up to practice, he was going to be running kind of like post sort of like combine school type times. But he had that habit of like leaning forward, so his body would hit that kind of correct. It would look like the correct lean, but he'd have no power in that next step. And what I started having him like really getting onto him about was not just leaning forward, but simultaneously like dropping, trying to like, so that he was leaned forward, like he would fall if he didn't take a step, but that he was still like loading up that front leg, because otherwise, like if he wasn't loading up his left leg, then his first step on his right foot it would almost just turn into like a rolling start. And then I started noticing that with a lot of kids, and so I have changed that cue from like lean to like drop your level.
And I think
I don't know if I have a question about that. That's my thought process.
I know, and I'm with you, and I think that's something that chains definitely help with, because it gives them, it's almost like training wheels on a bike.
Yeah.
It gives them something to lean into where that fear of falling on their nose isn't quite as aggressive. Especially those younger sprinters, the first thing that you may get one decent step out of them, but then they're up. It's like that fear of being at that angle, or the muscle related to being at that angle, is just not there, where the chains give them almost a training wheel effect. They have a little something. Now, the chains have to be heavy. One little chain behind them isn't going to allow that. That's why we use timers, so we can see how much we're slowing them down in those chains. But you give them a little confidence that they can lean in those chains and get that second step and still drive the way you want them to drive.
Yeah. What, bringing up the chains, I have a lot of conversations with people about, say, like dumbbell jumps. Lots of conversations around VBT and squats and what you're trying to do with your speeds and whatnot. And even like yesterday, I had, as we were doing exit velos off the tee, a kid's asking me, well, my coach says, using the weight on the bat slows me down. And I'm like, well, that's literally the point. So there's a reason why you might want to slow down. and there's a reason why slowing you down might not be a good idea. I'm like, but so it's like using a stove. You might burn yourself, or you might cook a quesadilla. One is delicious, and one is a trip to urgent care or something. But what what are you looking for with it? Like, give me an example of sort of the setup of using the chains, and then what distance you're timing, and how much are you looking for them to slow you down?
Okay, so when we set this up, and I had leaned on, me and Sammy Seabach had a few conversations, and I know you talked to Sammy a lot, to try to figure out what would be a good starting point. And through that conversation, I had decided that I call it 150%. So on a, let's say we're looking at 10 yards, and we're gonna cover 10 yards. They start behind the timer. What is their natural time through there? So let's say it's, just for the ease of math, let's say it's 2 seconds, which would be incredibly slow, but for math, 2 seconds. So we know our baseline that we want to slow them down is 3 seconds. So we've got the 2 seconds originally, and then another 50%, so 3 seconds. But what I found was, if you try to jump to that number too quick, like if you try to just go to that 150%, you won't have the benefits as if you go a little slower. It's because they adapt so fast that you can, and then once they hit that 150%, give them a little bit more, because it's crazy how the human body adapts. So if you give them reps, before you know it, they're pulling more and more and more and more, and you give them time to adapt. So my baseline is what I would say is probably 150% in 10 yards, but we will go over that just because I know they will adapt. So let's say they go 200%. Let's say they slow down to 4 seconds. Well, it's not really what you want, but let's try it again. Well, then that number comes down, because they've adapted to what those chains are going to feel like, what that shock's going to feel like, and then now you're at more weight. So I would say that 150% is our baseline, and then we'll go up a little from there and see if we can bring it back down, kind of like you were talking about in the squat earlier in the podcast. Is let's see if we can incrementally approach this where we can take a heavier weight and bring it back down to the number we want to bring it back down to. And then we'll take chains off and we'll set them free and see what happens. And sometimes you see a huge benefit right off the get-go, and then sometimes it takes a little bit more, but there again, it goes to knowing it's going to work. So just because it didn't work this session doesn't mean in 3 sessions you're not down 0.2.
What's the distance you
typically 10 yards
there?
Typically 10 yards.
You're going out to 10?
Yeah. So they'll start right behind the timers. So there is no lead in. Their first move, the timer picks up, and then they have 10 yards. So usually it's a pretty quick time. If you go further than that, well, then they end up, getting the weight off the chains, and you can't see really what the true time is because they're moving into a different part of acceleration. I'm really concerned with the first 3 to 4 steps when I'm timing that.
Yeah. Have you by chance like played around with or had interest in like the activator belt?
I don't know that I've played with it too much. Have you seen some benefit from it?
Yeah, I had one, and it got unfortunately somebody broke into my car and stole a North Face backpack that just had some dirty like well-worn Antepes muscle runners, some smelling salts, and an activator belt. So to my neighbor who stole that from me, I hope you're getting fast, at least. I know you don't wear size 13. He also got arrested, but I wish he would have told me where he chunked the stuff into the woods. drugs were involved in this situation. But it's like you took a whole bunch of things that I can guarantee you are not going to use. Um, but yeah, we were using the activator belt, sort of in lieu of a sled or a 1080, or like it just as a method of resistance. Um, I really liked it, and we would run our like 10-10s with it, and it would generally slow people down about a tenth at first, and then they would get down to where it was like 4/100ths off. But we would, I I don't think that they do not advise using it in the way that I did. Again, I took it from like Bird, who was just like, oh yeah, we just sprint our flies with it. And it's a really, because you feel it like pull your foot up simultaneous. So it creates this like almost like you're floating, and it's like an overspeed while still having like, it's still, you're resisting to like punch down. And I wanted to then pair that with Bird's like wicket system as well, to like force you to, overextend your stride while having the activator belt. I just want to see like everything thrown on, hit the vibration plate beforehand, like, but with my like college group over the summer, we had a lot of fun with that. I've got a couple more that are on the way now to sort of replace that, because I have a bunch of kids who are starting to get fast again, starting to hit around 106 to 108 on that 10 to 20 split. So I decided the other day, like, I had to re-up and get replacements for that.
Now, didn't Huntington use that with Sue when he was over in China? Yeah, and they really worked on it.
I believe it's his like creation.
Yeah, and it really helped with ankling.
Yeah,
because it's pulling that foot up, and you have to really push through that band at the bottom.
Yeah. It almost like it forces you to have sort of like significant frontside mechanics, and it almost like it's weird. Once you get the first time they run through, they're terrible. It feels so unnatural. But once you just like commit to like, all right, I'm going to sprint through, it almost like floats your feet up into this cycle underneath you. And it's really this feeling of like being put on guardrails. You're simultaneously being sped up and having to resist to punch through. It's I thought at first that it was super gimmicky, and then Bird was telling me how he liked it, and I was like, all right, well, I'll take a shot on one. And real quick, I mean, like, I have my 285-pound defensive tackle, who's at Ferris now, went from running 128 from 10 to 20 to 113.4 at 285, 286. And that was, it was almost what I was looking for was to be that sort of contrast, almost like a dumbbell jump. I don't know over the first 10, like, that it sort of slows us down to that point. In fact, I don't think that it doesn't, like, I don't think that it fulfills the same role in terms of like a straight, like, real early acceleration like that. It's more sort of like that like almost transition from the deep lean as you're starting to come up right. So for a lot of kids, probably that like 10 to 30 range. But yeah, I liked it a lot.
It's starting to pull their hips under a little bit. So when you put that
Yeah.
on there, do you see them freak out a little? The first few
Oh yeah.
sprints with it?
Yeah, they freak out. They freak out a lot, and the moment that because it feels like your feet are getting snatched out from under you, but they're getting shot up. They are getting shot up under you and sort of forward. So like there's nowhere to fall, but it feels, like I've done it. It feels like you're going to fall, but there is nowhere to fall. Like all you could do conceivably is like taking a slow escalator down to like a kneeling position almost over a period of steps. But once you just like send it and go, because I look at all movement, like on that same sort of spectrum of like, there's two problems we're solving. Either it's I need more force or I need to coordinate faster. And so that with like yanking your foot up hits that like coordinate faster with, simultaneously with the other, one leg is coordinating faster and one leg is pushing down harder. So it's a really unique feeling, and it's you can feel it very quickly, like on your hips and your hip flexors especially. But it kind of checks that box of almost like cranking us into overspeed without having another device. But the original intent was as something to just like, let's slow us down a gear and see, can we pick the speed back up? So almost more akin to, because it's not real variable. So it's more akin to like what you were talking about with squatting, which I realize now, like that same concept of what you were talking about with squatting, like that's what I do with sprinting. And then like so you just inverted on both sides the paradigm that like I tend to default to looking at things through. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, before
Yeah.
we get too far away from it, you talked about your hitters, and you talked about a heavy bat and a light bat. This is something I think I've noticed, and we'll see if you've noticed it or not. When you line up your hitters, some will see greater increases from a heavy bat, and I believe those are your strength based athletes. And then some of them will see better correlations from a light bat, which I believe are your more of your speed athletes. And it seems like you can't change that. And the only reason why I say that is I ran into that in the shot put last year. We had a kid that I went through all the system, and I'm like, okay, we're throwing heavy going into the meet, and then as we get Wednesday, Thursday, we start dropping to a light shot, and that should theoretically help get you there. Made no difference. He actually threw worse. So we went to a heavy shot put. We almost inverted it. A heavy shot put. Well, now he's breaking PRs. But then we had another kid that we tried that with. It did not work. We had to flip that, and he had to throw a lighter shot going into the meet to throw further. Do you see that in your hitters, that a heavy bat will help this kid, but a heavy bat will hurt this kid?
I haven't done enough heavy bat stuff. What I really would like to do is to set it up basically the same as the dumbbell jumps. To in an ideal world where I had the money and bats were durable enough, which everyone go buy OVR so that I can run these experiments. If I'd like to have like 3 bats basically, and to have them all be close enough that there's the sort of dynamic correspondence is close enough. Not that I normally have like a huge emphasis on dynamic correspondence, but in the same way that like with our dumbbell jumps, I used to track I eventually just stopped really dealing with this so much, and honestly, like, we don't do as many dumbbell jumps now. I would rather do belted marches than dumbbell jumps. But there was a long time, I mean, a period of probably like 3 years where, so I would do, just literally like Jared's dumbbell jump wave, 3 weeks, and I'd assign my kids, based on 4 levels. And so every kid by his name, there'd be, it'd say level 1, 15/20/25. And then when I had my workout sheet, which would just be a roster basically, and it would have columns that had numbers in it and then an empty column next to it, and then numbers and an empty column. And basically you could read your workout left to right and see what was the number I was trying to hit. And then you'd write in what you actually got, and you'd fill out, my kids, they still do this. They fill everything out that way. But I would have like their week 1 dumbbells, and it would have their record, and then they'd write in what they got that day. And it'd be, week 1 dumbbells, week 1 vert, max vert. So it'd be like your all-time max, but then also your week 1 max. So on the lightest of the three weeks, I'd see certain kids, my baseball kid who was real springy, Mark, who just signed with UNF last month, who he jumped 39.1 and was like a, sub 6'5" kid in the 60. Super explosive. Relatively very strong, like well over, 2 times body weight on reverse lunges for reps. But he would do best on week 1. Springy elastic kid. Like when he jumped, he didn't really load up a lot. It was, mostly sort of just flop over at the hips and boom, spring up. Much like my 25-foot long jumper. Same kind of, very hyper elastic kid who was hip dominant. And both of them jump better on week 1, lighter weight. My worst athletes, sort of, they would jump best on week 3. And then kind of the kids in the middle would jump best on week 2. So I wanted to do that kind of with the bats as well, to be like, okay, it's week 1, what's your record with, the light bat? And then week 2 would be your regular bat, and week 3 would be, or to have 3, I would want to do it the same way where they we're going from the off-speed bat, basically, to the on-speed bat. So the same way that we would do dumbbell jump and then regular vertical. So I've thought about that a lot. I would like to run that sort of experiment. I have a bunch of plyo balls. I can tell you that I throw a 7-ounce ball faster than I throw a 5-ounce or the 5.5 or whatever the baseball is. I throw better with the slightly heavier ball. And then I throw worse as it gets lighter than that. And based on what I throw, a 1-pound ball, I should be throwing 87, 88. But it's only 3 miles an hour slower than what I throw the 7-ounce. Yeah. So I'm, by comparison, among the worst of my sort of, genetic athletes at this point, which makes sense. I'm old. Not that old, but older.
I see that in AR too. So
Yeah.
Some kids respond really well to bands, and other kids it doesn't move the needle where chains do. And I think once you establish what athlete type you're dealing with, then you can really start making some progress, because bands aren't going to hit this strength kid like chains are. Now, like you said, in a big setting, you can't just keep moving that around, but hey, if we're going to peak this kid for a certain thing, we know what's going to hit him harder based on the athletic type that we've seen through his dumbbell jumps, through multiple avenues to know that what's going to hit him is different than what's going to hit this kid. So yeah, you got a kid that's chasing something big, chasing a big scholarship, chasing a state title. You can make that a little bit more adaptable to get him over the hump, I think, without getting crazy in the weeds.
Yeah. It's also a thing though too where and I definitely I didn't really play baseball when I was young. I played baseball a little bit, but I hated it. Now, like as a coach, I love baseball. I love softball, especially because both sports are just like, this is just fast shot put. Like this is just fast throwing. Like the broader contrast is more exciting, but it's like, this is awesome. They walk up, they compete for 5 seconds, and then they go sit down for 15 minutes. Like this is a perfect sport. And generally their coaches are sort of instinctively cooler with them kind of having a more laid back approach to like workload and volume. Like those sports are just real chill. But it is a thing where I also see kids who all the time who like based on their numbers they should be so much better, and like when I do get to watch them hit, like you can see like, oh, they're real stiff, and you give that kid a heavy bat and it just gets worse. But it's a thing of like, is it getting worse because like his body just does that, or is it getting worse? Like, is it getting worse because he has no idea of what his proper intention should be? Like conceptually, he does not understand hitting. I see that all the time with any kind of movement. Like he doesn't understand. He doesn't know what it feels like to have your hips and shoulders separate. So like any outputs I get from him might be bad. They might, it might just be terribly misleading. Like I'm not actually seeing the physical response that I'm looking for. I'm seeing the limitation of his sort of like strategic or tactical understanding. So I'm not real quick to write a lot of things off because of that idea, because I see that all the time. And that's also like, you look so many times at like the kid who's the standout athlete, and what makes those kids frustrating to everyone else is like, those other kids might have the same outputs and they're not as good. And that leads kids to go like, well, that leads kids and coaches alike to go like, well, see, the weight room doesn't matter. And it's like, no, because if you make that good kid slower, he gets worse. You make that good kid faster, he gets way better than all the other. Like, it's the physical component is skill is the force multiplier. So like the more skill, the bigger the contrast of multiplication. Like it again, to me, should invert how we look at skill and training. But to everyone else, it seems to draw people instinctively the opposite direction, where they discount everything that's happening in the weight room. And you go like, no, this is actually just showcasing that no one has ever taught this kid how to play the sport. No one's ever taught this kid how to swing a bat. So it's, it's little things like when I hit my garage sometimes, like my exit velo is like 76 miles an hour. Like it's not that hot. I was watching middle schoolers, go 80 plus yesterday, and I'm just like, geez, I'm like 3 times this kid's size. But he knows what he's doing, and his swing looks good and fluid. And mine, like I, like I'm having to think and sort of self-correct and like slow down my hands, keep everything, like don't cast out, like keep it tighter, and having to think about like almost if I was like trying to like yank a gigantic axe that I couldn't get any leverage over to get out, that I'd have to like pull the barrel of the axe close to me, almost like sheathing a sword. And it's like, oh, then my velo goes up. And I watch kids hit and I'm like, oh no, he's all hands. He's all arms. And it's like, you can do that because the implement is so light. And then you give him a heavier bat and he tries to do more arms. And it's like, but if you got to a point of, if I put enough resistance on it, so I went even further that direction to where, again, it's a real heavy axe. And he's literally like, if I told him go chop a tree in 10 minutes, he would start to create separation because that would be the efficient means to wield that implement without exhausting yourself. So you go a little bit in that direction, it makes things worse. You go a lot in that direction, and suddenly it provides the necessary contrast to start understanding the concept where everything was disconnecting in the first. It was like it wasn't disconnecting because of the physical. It was disconnecting because of the strategic and tactical.
You're hitting on a note I made earlier when we were talking. I work with a lot of softball pitchers. My daughter was a pitcher. I spent a lot of time in pitching lessons. I spent a lot of time on a bucket. And what you're saying is what I found. If I can slow that pitcher down, and we do it through sprint mechanics, all that is acceleration. It's the first step of acceleration, looking at ground contact time, pulling the hip through, and then whipping through the finish. So if I can get their acceleration better, they can feel it better. They're in the ground better. Chains. But you really have to slow it down. Like you said, I usually got to hook chains up to them and really slow them down so they have to generate that force in the ground and pull through. Their velo goes up. Boom. And then there's something that clicks in their head like, okay, this is running. I'm just running in place. And then they put it all together. All of a sudden, if it was a little bit of resistance, they would never get it. They wouldn't understand. It wouldn't be enough. But you load them up heavy where they have to push through coming off that mound. And then you can set it up. You've seen them all those girls do the walkthrough pitches. They take a couple steps. Well, then you set your OVR up and you start looking at the ground contact time of a walkthrough pitch. Well, then now you can say, look, you're out of the ground way too fast. So let's get you in the ground longer. Well, that may take chains to get them in the ground longer. Well, now their velo starts going up. They start putting all that together. Now their hips are driving. And you're not even teaching softball at that point. You're just teaching a movement they understand and slowing it down where they can take it back to the mound. And all of a sudden you got huge jumps in velo. And they understand, like you said, they understand what needs to happen. Because you always got the person sitting behind the dugout, just throw strikes. Well, no crap. That's not helping. What can we do to help? And that's what I found helps, is exactly what you're saying, is there's a point of you need to go heavier to get them to understand and slow it down.
Yeah. Well, that sort of ties into like, I'm really big on board presses. And I used to have, we used to max out on boards all the time for ones. And we had 1 boards and we had 2 boards and we had 3 boards and 4 boards. And after a while, I was like, their 1 board numbers are basically the exact same as their bench numbers. In fact, a lot of kids go down. And I'm like, so for me, like in the cycle that I was doing, which was like a Hoff thing, I was going like 5 boards to 4 boards to 3 boards to 2 boards to 1 to half a board to my chest. And I have big jumps between each of those. I mean, like I'd get 20, 30 pounds out of a half board. And I'd get another 20 or 30 out of, going from the half to the 1 board. So I might be plus 50, plus 60 pounds off of just 1 board. So it's huge, a huge percentage contrast, and just in terms of numbers, huge contrast. But for my kids, it was like they couldn't distinguish from a feel and like from a sensitivity perspective. They could not distinguish between their chest and a 1 board. And they couldn't distinguish between a 1 and a 2, but they could distinguish between their chest and a 2. So there's times like in terms of, doing the dynamic effort stuff and micro loading and going, we're just going to chase 0.6. Can we add 5 more pounds? Can we add 5 more pounds? Can we add 10 more pounds? Can we add small increments and have you just figure out how to keep repeating at the exact same speed where you can't really tell how much different each set is. But on the boards, it's like, no, I eventually got to the point where I was like, okay, we just do a 4 board now. And that works a lot better because it's close enough to the motion of a bench where like they understand it, but they feel a massive difference between their chest and 4 boards. Between their chest and a 2 board, they didn't feel enough of a difference. So as an observer, it looks like I'm assigning them, 2 radically different exercises, but to them, it felt too close to the same thing. So it's like there are times where you're leveraging the fact that everything feels the same, and then there's times where you're purposefully creating such a contrast that they're definitively, even though conceptually they rely off like the same drivers, they are definitively in their mind like classified as these are 2 distinctly different things. Their high box and their low box squat, very similar movements. But the kids are like, no, that extra 3 inches feels so much different. Like that's the same skill required to do both, but their perception of those 2 are, no, those are radically different movements, radically different numbers.
We've added a lot of board presses in, and for a long time I didn't. Mm-hmm. And what I started noticing was their 2 board was less than, in a lot of instances, their 2 board was less than their bench press. And so I started chasing the down board. So whatever board was down off your regular bench press, we needed to improve there. And we've integrated that in as.
Do you know what causes that?
I've talked about this on the podcast a little, and so I'm torn. I'm torn on what it is. I'm torn on if it's a deficiency in the triceps, which I've heard Louis talk about that, but I don't know that I'm sold on that. I feel like
on a 2 board, no.
I feel like they're starting to reach a better leverage, so they coast through that off their chest. And so now we're taking that back and making them learn how to push through that instead of using the benefit of speed to get through that point, but I don't know.
It's the combination of when it's going to depend on like their forearm length and their thickness. So, for a lot of kids, that 2 board is right where Louis would talk about their mini max, having minimum leverage and maximum tension or maximum resistance. So when their elbow is lower than that, their chest and shoulder are sort of pulled back like a bow. But as their elbow comes in line with their shoulder, now your elbow is, it's also going to depend on like, yeah. So as their elbow comes in line with their shoulder, they're often still below a 90-degree angle. So like, and especially if their elbows kind of chicken wing out a little bit. So they don't have any leverage from their tricep. And they've lost the leverage. They hit this point of, if they extend half an inch more, suddenly their elbow is in a slight go from a slight acute to a slight obtuse angle. And all of a sudden now you can, do the Ryan Kennelly squeeze and push out, and the bar will rise and you just keep fighting through and you're unstoppable. And it's like you can lock out whatever you choose to load. But there's that just tiny little transition in the middle, where, yeah, you can get their triceps strong enough that they can essentially like skull crusher their way through that fraction of an inch. And it is like they don't have that momentum coming out of it, but that momentum is, it's no matter where you, no matter how strong you get, it's like, that's the point where you miss almost all your benches, no matter what your sort of like, as you become a balanced, mature lifter, that's where you miss. So it is putting them like, oftentimes two board is right where that catches. I've had like a real, my big 6'4", 6'5" tight end who had like 6'6" leverages. He would get caught on a 3 board, which I'd virtually seen no one get caught at. But his forearms were so long that his elbow was still below the shoulder on a 2 board. But if he gained weight, then his 3 board would now be past that point and his 2 board would ease into it. Or if he just, figured out a better setup for his upper back and his sort of wedge and arch, if he could belly up to the bar more. But yeah, it's like getting caught, 2 inches above parallel on a squat. It's just like, well, there's just that transition point where, yeah, if you don't have triceps, you're dead in the water. If you do have triceps, it's a matter of, can you fight through that point? Can you get like your elbow to almost float up under your wrist? And can you just hold on? Because that's, especially with young kids, that's where their CNS like just taps out, where the governor on their brain. That's why I like the board presses, is specifically to put them just above that and, continuously put their central nervous system in that point of like, they have the leverage, but their brain is not yet accustomed to allowing them to fight through. And then all of a sudden, one day, it's like their board press jumps 20 or 30 pounds and they say like, like everything feels light. It's like, yeah, because your brain has finally decided this is safe and is like willing to jump on board with us.
That's the best explanation I've heard, and it makes more sense than anything I was coming up with.
It's I've listened to Louis, like talk around that point, and then listening to Ryan Kennelly and listening to Hoff and watching like Jason Coker and I've just had a good tapestry of influences, like specifically right around that point. But yeah, that's why I'm such a big fan of the board press. Man, so now I got to start getting ready, basically for coaching today. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I enjoy getting to actually talk training with you. So we've got to circle back and do it again sometime. Where can people find you, and what do you have that you would like people to find?
I would say the YouTube is probably where the majority of the training style podcasts are, and tempering. If I added some tempering stuff because I've noticed the game changer in that. I know you got a coach, so I won't get down a deep rabbit hole, but
No,
tempering has been a game changer in how I see movement, how I see injury prevention, and how I see recovery. So I've added some stuff on there that I found, and then all of the podcasts are on there. I've also on all of their platforms, Spotify, all of that. I have quite a few episodes, so surely there's a coach on there you like somewhere that you can find to enjoy. Instagram's Voodoo Power. I post a lot of my kids on there. That's probably where I meet the majority of coaches. I do some stuff on X, but X just really ain't my thing. I post some stuff on there, but I'm not real active. I don't know. It's just not where I go. So Instagram and YouTube, and then any podcast platform will have some great coaches, good conversation. Voodoo Power. Yes, I introduced it as Plates and Pancakes. That goes back to the early days. We would bring athletes in, we'd feed them breakfast, and then we would do podcasts. So I never moved from that actual title because I didn't see this becoming what it's become. So I didn't prepare. I didn't prepare well enough. There wasn't a playbook at the time to tell you how to develop a podcast. So there's a little disconnect between Voodoo Power and Plates and Pancakes. I get it, but it's all the same thing. And it's some really awesome coaches you've been on. Bird's been on. A lot of guys we've talked about have been on the show.
Yeah. Yeah. No, somebody told me the sort of origins of Plates and Pancakes just like last week. And I was like, oh, I've always have wondered that, like, a real consistent sort of conflict of branding.
Yes, yeah. When you let some dumb country guy start a podcast, he never looks past the week in front of him. So in the beginning, it was great. We'd bring him in. We had a little tablecloth that went over the table. It had a Plates and Pancakes logo, which is still kind of in the thumbnail. And I never saw it going past that. Like who wants to listen to me talk to random people? And for whatever reason, coaches said yes, they would come on. I have no clue why, and they still say yes, and it blows my mind. But so I didn't know what to do, so I'm just like, well, I'm this far in. I hate to change it now, so that's where we're at.
Yeah. No. Definitely go. If you like this podcast at all, you'll love Steven's. It's a much better podcast. And you have such a library of coaches at this point, and just like sort of the back little third or quarter there where this really became more your podcast again. You ask great questions, and you actually get to some real like meat on training and consistently, and you're again just great interviews, especially for the format. So yeah, go check out Steven, go check out OVRperformance.com. Again, I'm sure we've sold out of more stuff by now. And yeah, if you enjoy this at all, like it, subscribe it, do all those things, tell some friends. As always, I've got a long list of coaches that I need to catch up with. If you're interested in following up on any of this and you would like to hear what does it sound like when you ask Michael Fahey a question on the internet, send me a DM and you will probably get on my car ride either to or from the gym a personal podcast of sorts breaking down whatever you've asked me and probably 5 things you didn't. So with that, this has been another episode of Burn the Ladders. Until whenever it is that I do podcasts these days, I'll see you then.